Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of News Story Leadership, we would like to thank you and welcome you all for attending Johns Hopkins Annual Academic Forum, hosted in partnership with the School of Advanced International Studies. Again, we would like to thank Johns Hopkins for partnering with us on this yearly event, and we appreciate the use of their space. My name is Tabitha Richmond, and it is my honor to introduce to you all a group of amazing individuals that I have had the privilege of getting to know over this past month. These individuals, who I can now call my friends, have experienced so many hardships, yet they stand here today ready to share not only their stories, but their visions of hope for the future. The truth of the matter is, I cannot begin to understand what my Israeli and Palestinian friends have endured because I've never had to live through the middle of a conflict. I don't know what it's like to have to go through checkpoints to get from one location to another. I don't know what it's like to face discrimination based on my national identity. I don't know what it's like to be harassed walking down the streets simply because of the language that I speak. I don't know what it's like to fear missile attacks that could kill my entire family. And I don't know what it's like to fear being stabbed while walking home. But it's because I do not understand that I want to listen, and I want to learn. I want to learn from this group of courageous individuals because though they have faced unimaginable odds, they have hope. They have ideas on how to bring the light back to their region. Their understanding and respect for one another has the power to bring inspiration to us all, to inspire us to be better and to do better. Joining our fellows are 7 panelists, each with their own distinguished fields and accomplishments that will add another perspective to this discussion. We are so honored and grateful to each of you for being here today, so thank you so very much. To my Israeli and Palestinian friends, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being an inspiration to me and showing me what strength and courage actually looks like. Each of you have already changed my life in so many ways, and I know that that is something that will stay with me always. To all those who are in attendance today, let now be the time that they change your life as well. I encourage each of you to listen to their stories the fellows share today. I encourage you to join the conversation and speak with them afterwards. Listen to their stories, reflect on them, but most importantly, share what it is you learned from them today, because it is not only what is said that matters, it is what gets heard. And their stories need to be shared. Their voices need to be heard. Once again, we would like to welcome you to our event, and to begin, we will play a short video that was created in 2010 during the founding of News Story Leadership that just represents the goals and missions of News Story Leadership and what NSL Fellows try to accomplish every year. So we'll begin with that. And now we'll hear a few words from our founder, Paul Costello, followed by speeches from Aya and Katya.
Thank God I didn't wear the same shirt today as in the movie. And when I go to the barber, I tell him, cut as much grey hair as you can off. But he says, do you want me to scalp you? I said, no, leave a little bit of hair. My name is Paul Costello, and I'm one of the founding board members and president of News Story Leadership. And I just want to, first of all, say thank you so much for taking your time out on this Monday morning to be with us. It's a very special occasion, and it's something we look forward to every year. I think this is the 5th occasion that the science community at Johns Hopkins, through the wonderful work of Isabel and her team, allow us to use this wonderful space. And for the fellows who will get up and speak here, just to know that, Hillary Clinton has spoken from here, John Kerry, President, Secretaries of State, many illustrious people involved in shaping the world have had this rostrum, have had this forum. And given the intention of NSL, it's only appropriate then that we give a chance for the rising generations of young Israelis and young Palestinians, joined by their confreres from Ireland, from South Africa, and from locally, to share this stage with us. It's always been that way. So I want to say a big, big welcome. The second thing I want to take this opportunity to is to celebrate NSL's story. It's kind of funny that when you're working in story work, you're focusing on everybody else's story. And then sometimes you have to stop yourself and say, hang on a second, we never tell our own story. So let me just quickly do a little recap. We've had 8 classes of NSL fellows from 2010. But there was a team before the first Israeli or Palestinian. 2009, the first NSL team consisted of 3 Irish alums, Diane Halley, John Callahan, and Kate Hardy-Buckley. So it's only appropriate that we have Stuart here from the Washington Island program representing our sister program, because the Irish program was the original model that we took and tried out in Israel and Palestine. And last week I got really some bragging rights when one of my graduates, when I ran the Irish program, was just elected the Irish Prime Minister. So occasionally we can pick them. It's also, that first team consisted of 1 alum of the South African program, Olebile Galbepi, or otherwise known as OG. So again, it's appropriate and wonderful that we have 2 illustrious alums of the South African program to be with us here today. Because the Irish alums and the South African alums, together with Greg and Joyce and I, that's why NSL exists. So this event is always a celebration of all 3 programs and a new program today, which we'll get to later. The first intern wasn't an Israeli and it wasn't a Palestinian. It was a 17-year-old kid from American University, and his name was Elliot Jeffords. And the reason why you guys are working in Congressman Polis's office, because that 17-year-old was a friend of Jared Polis from Boulder, Colorado. 17-year-old. He was the first manager of the program in 2011. He was 18 years of age. So that tradition continues. We have an absolutely brilliant management team led by Matthew, who we recruited from American University summer semester 2 years ago. And this year he's gathered a team of 4 or 5 wonderful management teams. Some of them are at American University, and it's wonderful to have Steph Woods here, who's a professor at American University. So that's an alliance that goes way, way back to the very, very beginning, and I'm a proud alumnus of American University. The very first partner, I can still see it in my memory. We were at an event on Capitol Hill, and Diane Halley was listening to Ori Nia speak about Americans for Peace Now. And Diane says to me, I'm going to go up and ask him. I said, go, go, go. So Ori's on the panel today. The first person we asked to support NSL, can you partner with us? Can you give us interns? Was Ori Nia. And the fact that next day he happened to be walking his dog with Kevin Sullivan, the chairman of the Irish program, added some legitimacy to the request. But Ori's been our partner from day one. So it's like, yeah, let's give all these people. I just want to say that before we even get into the Israelis or the Palestinians, there's a whole cloud of witnesses that congregate together to create what's possible today and continues to make it possible. When we named New Story Leadership, we didn't call it we were going to call it the Washington Israel-Palestine program, but that would have made a WIP program, another WIP program. So we decided we would just call it for its method. It's called New Story Leadership. It was an experiment, yes, but our original intention was that it was a method that had a program rather than a program that had a method. And goodness knows, in the last 12 months, we who live in Washington have suddenly had to wake up to the fact of the power of stories. And that if people tell kind of stories that are dividing or create suspicion or distrust, then we have to carry the consequences of that. I've always said Washington is a republic of stories. And so suddenly we're in Washington waking up to what NSL's major insight has been all along, that stories are lethal. And stories can be as amazing as treasures and gold and diamonds, and they can be as lethal as hand grenades. Today you're going to hear 4 amazing stories, and you're going to meet the other 5 members in the break, and I hope you make that conversation with them. Aya, Katia, Hashem, and Sapir. And they're going to tell you their stories, and they're going to sort of demonstrate what they've learned on the program. That it's time to find better stories than the stories we're used to about Israel and Palestine. And it is also time to tell our core stories, our identity stories of what it means to be an Israeli or what it means to be a Palestinian, to tell those stories in ways that are more respectful and more inclusive and more open to some possibility. When we started this program in 2009, we were caught up in the euphoria of, yes, we can, President Obama. I mean, I don't know about you, but it's like, that feels like when we lived on Mars, and now we're back to Earth. It seems like a long time ago. In the last 9 years, every time I visit the region, what I see encourages me in terms of the alums, but what I see on the streets, I think in 7 days when I was over there in April, I think there were about, amongst young Palestinians and young Israelis, there would have been about 8 or 9 people killed. So in a sense, it's heartbreaking every year to see so much promise in Washington and then go back to the region and see, where are we going with this? As far as the fellows who are here this year, increasingly just the fact that they're here is the new story. Because the young people from Israel, increasingly that progressive wing of young people in Israel seems to be getting much more under attack. So they risk a lot of reputational capital to be on a program like this. What are you doing mixing with those folks? And the Palestinians, they risk their lives, some of them, to come on a program like this. It's unbelievable courage that these 10 fellows display. Just by being here is the news story. And one of them's not here. Loi, from Gaza, the 10th fellow. He can't get permission from America, Jordan, Israel, Fatah, Hamas to go for an interview, let alone get a flight to the United States. So what I'm trying to say is, you're going to be inspired by an amazing sense of hope from these young people. But they will be the first to tell you that we've also got to get real. I'm always fighting with Israelis when I try to dream, and they'll say, come on, Paul, get real, get real. And I guess I'm listening to that now, a lot more. To say that I don't want to be giving you, young people, we don't want to be giving you false hope, nor do we want to be setting ourselves up as the paragon of virtue. Come to America and learn how we get on. Come to America and see the American dream in action. See how we pass healthcare reform. See how we treat immigration. Treat what we do for refugees. In some cases, maybe the Israelis and Palestinians should run a program for us Americans to go over and see that some of the things they do there might be better than what we do here. It's a strange world. But I want to just restate, NSL is about the narrative method, and our job is to teach the young people how to use stories to create change. Some of my colleagues are in the audience who know that it's not just Israel and Palestine where this is working its magic. Some of you know Noah Baum, who's my colleague, way before we did this work in storytelling. Here's her latest book. She's one of our faculty, absolutely brilliant lady, teacher. She's taking her narrative method that's part of my training program from years ago. World Bank is using the narrative method that NSL is taking out into the world. NASA, the IMF, the World Bank. If you want to read 3 chapters of this new book came out last year from Wiley, 3 chapters in this book are about the NSL method. I think sometimes when we don't see an opening horizon of possibility in this work, we've got to sort of take a step back and say, hang on a second, why are we doing this? And we've got to sort of ask ourselves, I think, we've got to be careful we don't get trapped in the Israel-Palestine vortex. We've got to stay in the big story, and we've got to invite the young people in Israel and Palestine to stay with the big story. In conclusion, then, let me single out then what is the impact of 9 years of work. As the Irish and South Africans helped create NSL has created Shade's Negotiation Project. It's helped create El Barrio, the first boxing gym in Palestine. It's created Reading Stars of Gaza. It was part of We Are Not Numbers. It was part of Echo Me. There's about 8 or 9 non-profits that NSL alums have created as the tangible proof of impact that this program, in some ways, is working way beyond its dreams. One of the newest programs is now a time for us to take this method and look at home and say the refugees that come into this country from Syria, a much blighted, tragic place. And we're proud to welcome today the first class of a new program called Ref America, founded by one of our board members, Leanne, and the first class is here, and we're privileged to do some work with it. Would you like to please stand up, and let's just welcome you to Thank you very much. So, just in conclusion then, what I'm saying is, even if Israel-Palestine continues to be embroiled, continues to be a struggle, I think we've got to pull back and NSL can't make those decisions for these people. All we can do is make the offer and give people the tools and encourage them to make the change that they know they need to make. But I think it would be kind of hypocritical if we're just looking at you guys and not looking at ourselves. And I just think that, we have events at Busboys and Poets, and the original busboy poet was Langston Hughes. Let me finish with his words about the big story that America always was and is and hopefully will be. Let America be America again, says Langston Hughes. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain, seeking a home where he himself is free. I'd like to welcome our 2 keynote speakers, Aya and Katya, who will present their presentations, and then followed by a panel. Then we're going to have a break, and then we'll have the next 2 keynotes, Sapia and Hashim, followed by a panel. And after each session, there's some questions and answers. So we hope that you will listen attentively and let their stories into your hearts. And thank you for your attention.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here today. My name is Aya Khalaili. I'm a Palestinian living in Israel, and I will tell you my story today about the city that changed me the most, Jerusalem. It took me many hours to write my speech today, because I'm writing about the most complex city I know. Maybe many of you never visited Jerusalem, Palestine, or Israel. But I will try my best to convey my experience despite what is seen or read in the media. Because living in Jerusalem is much more different than anywhere else. I hope that I will succeed in getting my story across to you and make it accessible. So I invite you today to come with me to my city, Jerusalem. I was 19 years old when I dragged my heavy suitcase and headed to the station to take the bus to Jerusalem. It was the day that I moved from Sechnin, a Palestinian city in the north of Israel, to Jerusalem to study my bachelor's degree in the Hebrew University. I rode the bus, I took my seats, and I put my headphones on, playing my music by my favorite singer, Fairuz. I leaned my head against the window, thinking about what would come next. A frustrated feelings filled me back then, when I realized that as the song goes on, I was leaving my home. After 3 hours, I arrived in Jerusalem. When I got off the central station, everything felt strange to me. The religious people chasing the buses, the horns of the car, even the air smelled different. I was a stranger in a huge unknown city. In my first days, I wandered in the alleys of Jerusalem to discover her compelling history, to get to know around, and as every other student, to know the nightlife side of the city. In the beginning, I discovered that Jerusalem is the city that culture do not mix. It's a city segregated by invisible wall that divided it into two parts. The west part where Israelis live, and the east part where Palestinians live. It's a city full of soldiers, filling the east part of it, asking people randomly to show their IDs. It's a city where an old woman sitting in the stairs with her Palestinian embroidered dress, convincing me buying za'atar and parsley in the old city. It's a city where people wander fearfully in its street, anxious and suspecting one another. It's a city which I'm afraid to be considered as an Israeli in the east part of it, and as a Palestinian in the west part of it. It's a place where people move away from me every time I speak my language, Arabic, in the Israeli side. My city, Jerusalem, in my city, Jerusalem, I'm afraid that my identity will be revealed. In my first year in Jerusalem, the city witnessed explosive period. 3 Israelis were kidnapped. A Palestinian boy burned alive. Palestinians were stabbing Israelis in the streets. And Israeli settlers burning Palestinians' houses. Both sides wished death to the other. My fears turned into reality on that unforgettable day, when I was heading to the Hebrew University at 7 o'clock with my friend. We parked the car in a parking lot in the top of a Palestinian neighborhood called Isawiye, which during that period witnessed hard time. It was, and still is, closed by 2 checkpoints from both entrances, prohibiting its people from entering or exiting the neighborhood unless it was urgent. We get out of our car, walking toward the university and chatting about how our day was. Suddenly, my friend shouted, "Run, Aya, run!" I started running without knowing why. I ran frightened, with my whole body shaking. I couldn't run anymore. I tripped and fell. My head hit the ground. A second later, someone from Isawiya threw a Molotov cocktail at us, thinking that we were Israelis. It exploded right next to my head. I was trembling, crying, and shouting. I closed my eyes, wishing to hear someone around. I don't know how long it took, but I found myself between my friend's arm, holding me and running as fast as he could. And the only thing that he shouted to save us was, إحنا فلسطينية, إحنا فلسطينية, وقف. We are Palestinians, stop it. When we had run far enough and we were in a safer place, a policeman came to us, asking for our IDs. After he read our names and knew that we are Palestinians, he asked, "Who threw the Molotov cocktail at you?" I answered, shaking, "I don't know." He shouted loudly, "We know that you saw him. Tell us the truth. If you don't cooperate with us, you will be taken to jail." The policeman didn't release us and kept us for 1 hour investigation. In that moment, I froze. On one side, Palestinians from Essaouira attacked me with an explosive bottle, assuming that I am an Israeli. And on the other, the policeman attacked me verbally, assuming I was covering up for Palestinian attacker when he was supposed to protect the victim. We, the Palestinians who have the Israeli passport, fall between the cracks. On that day, Jerusalem became black for me. What happened to me and what still happened to me every day during my life in Jerusalem is my feeling of fear, anxiety, and despair. These feelings caused me to attempt to change the place that I deeply care about. I started my project for change, to bring Israelis together to learn my language and my culture through music, food, and guided visits to the east part of it. The despair that I feel in this city gave me hope. Hope that will lead us to a new era of peace and coexistence. When I see my Israeli students speaking Arabic and dancing dabka, a Palestinian dance, Jerusalem feels more like home to me. Politicians feed us with wars and killing, but we are, the people, want to feed the world with hope and peace. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm really excited to be here today. Ahmed asked me to put another mic, so my name is Katia Lipovetsky, and I'm here today to tell you my story. I was born in 1993, the same year that Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat came all the way to DC to sign the Oslo Accords. Some say it was a year of hope back in Israel. But I can tell you, since I didn't know what hope means back then. By the time I grew up, the concept of hope probably exploded along with the buses in Jerusalem during the Second Intifada. Because when I was old enough to understand what our conflict means, there was no hope left. I grew up in a city called Ashdod, on the same shore as my friend from Gaza, Khaled. Only 20 miles away, with the gorgeous views of the Mediterranean Sea. My parents moved there after they migrated from the former Soviet Union, knowing only few words in Hebrew, but eager to pursue a better future for my brother and I. We grew up 20 miles walk from the beach, and visiting there was our treat. We took long walks downhill on early mornings, before the dawn, until we could smell the sea. Even on a sweaty summer day, as we have here usually, you could feel the breeze trembling your hair. I would kick off my shoes and run to the water, bathing myself, and then sitting quietly, dripping, and watching the sun rising above us. My grandma used to say that it must be how heaven looks like, smells like, sounds like. But Ashdod back in the days wasn't a heaven at all. It was a city, a small town with no more than 5 neighborhoods, few stores, and those beautiful untouched beaches. A city that accommodated mostly immigrants. Russian was almost the main language, to an extent that you could shop the grocery store, visit the clinic, and go to the theater without speaking even one word in Hebrew. One day, when I was 16 years old, the sound of wind and the crashing waves was interrupted by a deafening sound of a siren that cut through the air and changed our lives. Those were the first bombs from the Gaza Strip, dropped by Hamas on the surrounding cities. My little town was under a missile attack. The breeze was replaced by a smoke. The relaxing voice of the waves shifted into screaming and sorrow. Houses were ruined, kindergartens were destroyed. People fled as fast as they could, and my city turned into a ghost town. There aren't any words to describe how I feel the moment when you hear the buzzing sound of a bomb that is about to fall. And you have 45 seconds to find a shelter. It doesn't matter if you're in the middle of a shower, a run, or a passionate kiss. 45 seconds, and not even 1 second more. Those 45 seconds shape the perception of my reality, my values, my political understanding. Those 45 seconds determine the way I perceived Palestinians. Those 45 seconds frame the prejudices my friends and family back home still believe to be the truth. As I said, my parents were immigrants, coming to the land that promised them equality for the first time of their life, to be accepted for who they are after years of discrimination. The feeling that this little heaven will be destroyed was unbearable. I had always been raised on the notion that Palestinians are the bad guys. They are the bullies on the other side of the border. They're trying to kill us with their bombs, to stab us with the knives, to defeat us with our inability to accept the reality as it is, to accept the existence of our nation. It took me 45 seconds to form my impression on Palestinians, but 20 years until I actually met one. Khaled was my unspoken neighbor, the one that could be only one thing, an enemy. But I was lucky enough. I was lucky enough to study in a university that accommodated both Israelis and Palestinian, along with Aya. And I was lucky enough to get exposed, to hear the stories, to peel the layers of mistrust that have been created by the war we endured. I am an Israeli from Ashdod, lucky enough today to be standing here beside Khaled, a Palestinian from Gaza, who I easily can call my friend, with no knives and no bombs, no military airplanes, with no buzzing sounds of sirens or whistles of rocket. We are here on the other side of the globe, in the city that decisions upon our future are being made. Martin Luther King once said that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. I wish I could tell you that back in Israel, opinions aren't being shaped by 45 seconds of a flying rocket, but rather by meaningful encounters. That we have the light that will drive out the darkness. But unfortunately, the darkness is taking over the light. Our path is yet too long. Our barriers are yet too high. Our hate is yet too strong. We have a long way to walk until Khaled and I will be able to see the sun of peace rise upon us, healing with its light the bloody wounds of despair, until we will be driven by hope once again, until we will grasp each other's realities, until we will be able to reconcile our misunderstandings, until we will stop this vicious cycle of hate. A long way until we will redeem from the past that shape our present. I wish that my friends from NSL and I will witness a time when our stories will be just another line on history books, when the distance between our divided lands will be an old story of two free nations looking forward to a future full of hope. Out of our darkness, I can promise you one thing. Since I witnessed so many mornings while sitting on the soft sand on the beach of Ashdod, the darkest hour is always the one before the dawn. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for sharing your incredible stories. At this time, we would like to invite our first round of panelists to join us up here on stage. Each panelist has had their own distinguished fields and experience and are adding another perspective to this discussion. So if you would please come and join me up here, and then we will have you introduce yourselves. Or if you wouldn't mind beginning.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Boker tov. Sabah al khair. I thought maybe I'll talk just a little bit about the two fellows that we are hosting this year. So as Paul said earlier, we at Americans for Peace Now, we're the sister organization of the Israeli peace movement, Shalom Achshav, Peace Now. We've been partnering with News Story Leadership since the very beginning, and we host Israelis and Palestinians. For the past 2 years, we hosted two, an Israeli and a Palestinian, who worked together on a joint project. A part of my morning routine is calling my mother. I call her every morning at 9 o'clock. She lives in Jerusalem. And we talk about issues and so on. And the other day, I called her and I started giggling a little bit. And she says to me, "What's happening?" And I said, this morning, this moment, for the past couple of weeks, is the happiest moment of the day. And that good feeling kind of lingers throughout the day. And she says to me, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "I hear the giggling down the corridor." And that giggling is Katya and Hashim coming to the office. And their giggling lingers throughout the day. I hear it from my office just around the corner. And you'd say to yourself, it's natural, 25, I guess, something like that. Young people who are together, they form a friendship and they giggle. But coming from where we come from, it's the least natural thing to happen. We come from a segregated society. And for two people, although they both live in Jerusalem now, and although they're both graduates of Jerusalemite universities, for two such people to form a friendship, a real friendship, unfortunately, you have to come to Washington. And that's something that's a part of the magic, of New Story leadership. There's a lot more magic there. I wanted to say maybe one more thing, and that is that there's a tendency in Washington, in this kind of policy-oriented society or culture that we live in here, to somewhat dismiss people-to-people programs. And I have to say that this program is much more than people-to-people, but even if you only slice the people-to-people element of this program, what it achieves in a reality, as Katya just described, where hope is something that you really, really have to hardly look for, is magic. So I just want to say, just want to salute this program, to salute those wonderful fellows, salute Paul, and to tell you how happy I am to be on this panel.
Hi, I'm Steph Woods. I first met Paul in the first class I taught at American University on activism and social media, and that was fall 2011, and I'm thankful he pulled me in to this forum in 2015, I believe. With that, my background is far from the normal career trajectory, although it started that way in the beginning. I came here as an intern in college, and I stayed on to go to law school. I practiced in immigration legal services for about 10 years, and then I missed school, so I took time off to finish my thesis for an international studies degree from Georgetown. And around that time, I finally took my friend's advice and started a blog about my adventurous in dating and relationships. So back at its peak, I was averaging 30,000 page views on my site a month, and NBC's Angie Goff referred to me as DC's Carrie Bradshaw, for those of you that know the show Sex and the City. That seems like a lifetime ago. Now that I'm a professor and a mom of a toddler, and my life and my world has changed, but between then and now, I also was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I realized I had a forum with so many young individuals coming to my site every day where I could give a voice, just sharing my own experiences, but talking about dating with an illness, talking about being our own best health advocate, talking about what it's like to walk around DC bald. And with that, I think I added nuances to my site, to my writing, to my story. And then when I started teaching, I actually came up with the idea to teach a class, and I tweeted about it after having spoken at AU on a panel on sexual education. And within a month, I was teaching there as an adjunct. 3 years later, I received a full-time contract. So the idea that one tweet changed my life, which is funny to think about, but the entire trajectory has changed from that. So realizing the power of words, but also acknowledging what I felt comfortable sharing in my mid to late 30s might be very different from what I would share now, and likewise would have been very different than what I would share in my 20s. So as you're sharing your stories here, really thinking about safety and self-care. You might feel very comfortable sharing your stories in a room of strangers or in a room of new but very good friends. And when you get home, you might feel less so. And so I hope we'll talk a little bit about different ways where you can figure out different venues. Maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's an image, maybe it's an account that NSL sets up where you can email them your words, but it doesn't necessarily link to your face or your full name, so that when you go home, you can feel safe. And so recognizing where safety and self-care play a role. The last thing I would add, since it built on Paul's talk and how different things have been over the past 8 years, is recognizing the long game. And depending on which conflict we're talking about, whether it's domestic or international, the long game could seem very long. But I know many of my students over the past year came to me and said, is there a reason I should stay in DC? I came here to change the world, and I don't believe I'll be able to do that now. And I said, there are lifers here who day after day will serve whomever and whatever they feel called to serve. And so maybe you're doing that now, and that's the first step, and maybe you take a break from that, but in the back of your head, that the goal and the drive of peace, of solutions will always be there. It's just what role you'll play and what role you feel comfortable playing. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you for having me, and thank you, Aya and Katja, for sharing your stories. My name is Leila du Plessis. I was on the South Africa-Washington International Program last year, and it really changed my life and changed the direction in which my life is going. And that's why I decided to be a team manager for the program this year. I'm currently studying law, and I'm a final year law student at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and I'm looking forward to this panel discussion. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, and thank you so much to the NSL class for the invitation. My name's Stuart Irwin, and I'm on the management team of the Washington Ireland programme. And I was in the class in 2015 of WIP, and as Paul quite rightly pointed out recently, one of my fellow alumni has become the Prime Minister of Ireland. So at the minute, I think there's a lot of alumni trying to work out how we try and beat that, which should be a bit of a challenge. So yeah, I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and I think one of the reasons it's quite special for me to be along and meet the NSL class again is that in 2015 I lived with Joyce and Richard Swartz, and Joyce is at the back there, and she takes it. Her house is colloquially known as the United Nations because she takes in 4 students every summer, one Irish student, which was myself, an Israeli student, a Palestinian, and a South African, and so I feel very. So I got to know the NSL program 2 years ago, and I really it's quite close to my heart in that respect. And whilst Northern Ireland is certainly very different in terms of what's going on presently, and it was a reminder from listening to Aya and Katja, it's certainly given me a lot of food for thought, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So thank you.
With that, we will go straight ahead into a Q&A. So if you have any questions, Christian will be around with the mic.
Hello, my name is Dalton Booker. I'm a program associate with the Osgood Center for International Studies. And obviously, Aya and Katja, in your experience, you don't view Hamas and Fatah as freedom fighters. But there are a lot of people who do. And I was wondering what you guys think would need to change between both public perception as well as these, I guess it's theoretically the government of Gaza now, but these organizations' own practices and goals that would lead to a lasting peace.
Serious start.
Yeah, it's a very serious start. So you're asking if we see them as a freedom resistance? I can pass the question for any of our fellows that knows more about the Fatah and Hamas, because so I want to invite Khalid if you want to answer, since he lives in Gaza and he's so involved in this.
Okay, good morning. May I ask question again, please? Or reword the question is gonna be much better because it was. Okay, even the question is too complicated to answer because I'm not a politician. But the thing is that most of the Palestinians in Gaza consider Hamas and Fatah as freedom fighters, and some organizations in Israel and some even Palestinians consider Hamas and Fatah as militias and gangs at some point. But the thing is, if we want peace and we want to not consider them as freedom fighters, because as a Palestinian, I don't believe in politics and think about freedom fighters or this is occupation forces and whatever. But the thing is, through leaders and through non-politicians, we can achieve the peace. Because as Aya said, that politicians feed us with wars and killing, but we are the leaders, and we are the people, can feed us with hope and love. And as Katya said as well, that we have a long path to walk, and we have, because it's too dark tunnel, but we are the leaders, can make it happen. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm also a fellow. I think, first of all, it's important to make some points. There is a difference between Fatah and Hamas. Fatah is recognized by international community and also by the Israeli government as the leadership, the representative of the Palestinian people. And they are not considered, not by Israelis, not by Europeans, or not by US, as a terrorist organization. And they are responsible for the West Bank and for what's known by the Zone A and partially by Zone B. And the Hamas is another story there in Gaza. Khaled spoke a bit about it. And the situation is much more complicated as Europeans, Americans, and Israelis deal with them as a terrorist organization. We, as Israelis, we don't talk directly to Hamas. All the ceasefires agreements are made through third parties such as Egypt. So how can we change this? That's complicated because we have a really complex situation in Gaza. I think Khaled can explain much more than me. Different organizations there that are fighting to be in power. And the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority, led by Fatah, they are in the middle of this. How can put power, how can the Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, take control of Gaza? And there are big questions that I don't think I have an answer, but I just wanted to point the general picture.
Maybe just to add, just a quick observation, and that is that it is somewhat of a fluid situation. Changes, we have been seeing changes in Hamas in the past few years. in various directions. I mean, Hamas still is an organization that espouses violence and terrorism, but it just issued a new document that expresses some of its views, and some of the views expressed in this document are somewhat more pragmatic than have been in the past. There could be a scenario where Hamas reaches some kind of an agreement with Fatah that would lead to a certain sense of unity between the two factions of the Palestinian government, and would allow the mainstream of the Palestinian leadership to engage credibly with Israel in negotiations that would bring about peace. It's not, I don't see it at the moment on the horizon, but it's not impossible.
I just add one more word about the perception in the Israeli society of those organizations. So there is a huge difference between what you see, especially in international news and international media, and what you see inside the Israeli society. Most of the Israeli society view Hamas as terror organization, as someone, as I said, who is trying to kill us. And I think there is a lot to do until Israeli people will be able to accept even the idea of negotiating with the Hamas leadership.
One more thing I want to add, that Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people and the Gazan people. Hamas is just a government. This government come to an end. They were not gonna govern Gaza forever, and they don't represent the Palestinian people, and they don't represent me. That's why I am here today. Thank you.
Can I just ask our South African and Irish grads, you both come from backgrounds where, like Mandela was part of the ANC, which was outlawed, and Gerry Adams was part of a group that was outlawed. Can you comment from your experience about that kind of question in your experience of history? What turned Mandela from being of this to this, or what turned Gerry Adams, or maybe not, but just some comments from you guys about that in terms of your situation.
So I was born in 1994, so that was when apartheid ended and Nelson Mandela became president. So I didn't have any preconceptions on Nelson Mandela. When I was born, he was already sort of this hero. So I don't think I can necessarily answer that question from my own experience.
Yes, to offer some context for people that mightn't be aware, Gerry Adams would have been the president of, or still is the president of Sinn Féin, and Sinn Féin would have been seen as the political wing of the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, and for a time during during the Troubles, for people that aren't aware, we had the Troubles from around 1969 up until the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. Whenever Tony Blair came in, and there was an agreement whereby essentially we had a ceasefire, and that's where we are now with the peace process. But before, and I should explain with this peace process, Sinn Féin were very much brought in, and they negotiated on behalf of the IRA. But an important point to be made there is that beforehand there'd been a time when Sinn Féin weren't actually allowed round the negotiating table. Under Margaret Thatcher, when she was Prime Minister, was a time when Gerry Adams, the president of Sinn Féin, who was representing a significant number of people who felt that they were treated unequally in Northern Ireland, when actually you wouldn't hear his voice on television. It used to be that you had to have an actor that spoke that spoke for Gerry Adams. So there was a time whenever the British media refused to actually allow for Irish Republicans to have their voice heard. If you're asking Paul in terms of when things changed, I would suggest that and I should almost put this in the context once again, that I'm similar to you. I'm very much a kind of post-peace process baby. Well, maybe less so a baby now, but I would suggest part of it's maybe it might be just progress in terms of realising that mistakes had been made, and that to negotiate they had to bring these people in from the streets, in from where the violence was, and actually bring them around the table, bring them to Downing Street. Famous scenes when Sinn Féin's Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, who recently died, were actually brought to Downing Street, and this perception of the people that had previously been who had been supporting people that had been, for example, putting bombs in London, were now coming to Downing Street, and we're being invited to the House of Commons, traditionally the heart of Western democracy. It's maybe debatable, but so the point to be made is that they actually had to be. So I think part of it's about kind of recognizing that you talk about news story leadership. You have to have the discussion. People have to be brought in, and you have to be willing to hear them. But unfortunately, that takes a bit of give and take. Hopefully, that answers the question.
Hi, I'm Joyce. You all heard my name before. And my question is really directed mostly at Aya and Katya, but I think Steph Woods may want to jump in here too. We've heard a lot about how divided you are at home by physical barriers and every other kind. And we know you all have projects for change, but it's very difficult to do them as we had originally conceived them, with an Israeli and a Palestinian joining together to do this. So my question is, once you get back home, how do you think you can all stay in touch with one another? And even furthermore, how can you maybe bring in all of the other many, now almost 80, it will be 80 graduates of NSL, so that you stay in conversation? Because your world doesn't make it easy.
I think we witnessed from previous years that so many NSL's alumni created their own projects, as the projects that Paul mentioned. And there are so many things going on. I feel I am still discovering each and every day how many projects run by NSL alumni. I think the biggest barrier in our region is usually, now we have the someone from Gaza as well, but usually in the programs that I was part of is bringing people from the West Bank into Israel and Israelis into West Bank, because people from the West Bank who doesn't have an Israel passport and Israeli citizenship, they have to have a permit from the army. So in terms of trying to meet back home, that's always a barrier, but we're lucky to have technology. And we're lucky to have the ability to come here and to create the ground for our programs and for our projects right here. So hopefully it will grow up and grow bigger. And maybe in some years you will see a photo on Facebook of all of us in Jerusalem. Or Ramallah. Inshallah.
Inshallah. I totally agree with Katya. It's much more easier to meet here in DC than meeting back home because of all the barriers and segregating walls. But for my experience from past programs, which also brings Israelis and Palestinians together, the way that we kept in touch was by bringing Palestinian living in the West Bank to Israel by affording them permits. And we met usually in Jerusalem. So I wish that we will also have the chance to be meeting in Jerusalem as well.
Given the number of alumni, you could set something up on Facebook, but as we know, the internet is written in ink. It might be interesting with technology to have an NSL portal for members. Members would really be alumni and new students in the program. And that could be interesting, even if it's just a discussion forum to talk about ways, the different projects that are going on, since I know that the numbers of nonprofits have increased even just from last year, and to allow for types of communication. But it's also to tie this question to the last question, that within all of our respective circles, whether it's here in DC or not, there's the opportunity for these stories, sharing the stories, building the relationships, learning about the other, to think of those in less, the term in English is othering terms. So words matter as you're learning when crafting your story. And to find ways to, even just within your own circles and families, when you feel safe and comfortable to do so, to have conversations stemming from the human perspective. That most 20-somethings, much like Aya mentioned, are just looking for nightlife, whatever words you want to use. Most children, just like Katya mentioned, just want to be on the beach in peace. And bringing the human perspective back to your circles. In different classes I speak, and I said, well, you always need the economist at the table if you're dealing with anything involving numbers. You need the policymaker at the table too, especially in DC. But you need someone to talk about the people. And that might be what you're all bringing back. You have your own stories, but you're hearing from friends. And then if there's a porter where you're also adding former alumni stories to the table, and you're making sure that the people continue to matter in your respective circles, even and if it's still difficult for you to all meet as you are here.
As a fellow, I'd like to comment. Thank you. I can yeah, okay. So my name is Jonathan. I'm also a fellow, and I'm just going to present a very bland opinion about how we can meet each other. Besides Khaled and Luai, who live in Gaza, and there's an actual border that doesn't enable us to see them and them us, all of us have the ability to see each other. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, how much do we want to be with each other, and how much are we willing to risk? Some of us may not want to risk that much. Some of us may want to risk, may feel compelled to risk. It's easy for us to be here. But when we go home, I can take a Palestinian bus outside the old city of Jerusalem and get dropped directly in the bus station in Ramallah. I can do that. It's really scary, but I can do that, and I've done it.
And illegal.
And illegal. But you know what? The situation at home, if we keep working with certain rules, we're going to continue to be segregated. And I'm not saying let's all go and break all the laws possible, no. But if we're actually talking about a change, and we're actually talking about maintaining relationships that are so important and crucial to change reality, then maybe those rules need to be bent a little.
Hi, my name is Rowan, and I'm a fellow as well. So backstory, I went to a program in England that brought Israelis and Palestinians, and I found a connection with a very beautiful Israeli. Her name is Rotem from Haifa. So after the program, her birthday comes. She's like, Rowan, I want you to come to the birthday. And we said, okay, how do we do this? I need a permit, obviously, because I'm from Nablus, West Bank. I go to the Palestinian Authority, and then they say, what do you need the permit for work, for hospital? And I'm like, my friend's birthday. And they're like, are you crazy? And I'm like, but she's Jewish. So they say, okay, I do the application, and I write my friend's birthday, and I have her Israeli ID and the email that she invited me with. So now I have to go to the DCO, the Israeli side. And they say, what do you need the permit for? My friend's birthday. And they're like, what? Who? Rotem, who is this person? And they were so surprised that I was invited to a birthday party from an Israeli Jew living in Haifa. But I was like, okay, it's good. Maybe this is good. They're noticing that there's change. We're meeting, even though there's borders. I'm doing the right protocol so I can go and see her and have the nightlife in Haifa for her birthday. And then I wait 2 weeks, and then I go to get my permit, and I'm excited, and they're like, rejected. And I'm like these are the problems that Yonatan is saying, that the governments both are not helping us make that change and meet and communicate. So I did a protocol that me and her would be illegal, but I got there, and I partied. And I met a lot of Israelis that knew that I was Palestinian, and we exchanged stories, and we met. Through illegal terms, maybe, but sometimes, like Jonathan said, we have to bend the rules. Thank you.
Hi, this is really inspiring. My name is Mindy Reiser. I'm vice president of an NGO called Global Peace Services USA. We work on peace building and conflict resolution. I have a question about access to information, and our colleague up there certainly said important things. How easy is it for people to access the reports of organizations like the New Israel Fund or Americans for Peace Now? And there are any number of Jewish organizations in the United States and elsewhere that share a peace-building perspective and a serious critique of Israeli policy. How difficult is it to access that stuff by internet and other means? Can some people speak to that? I'm particularly interested in people in the West Bank and Gaza.
Me again. I think with the internet, we sometimes assume that we have unlimited accessibility to websites and organizations, but from a perspective of the society in Nablus, because I had access to an Israel-Palestinian program, I opened a window of opportunities with organizations like yours. Unfortunately, Palestinians from West Bank have no idea what these organizations do. They have a perception that they're normalizing the reality in which we live in, so they always take a step back from it. And when I'm speaking with my friends about organizations like Combats for Peace and Common Ground, they're baffled that there's really nice initiatives that they come from, but there's a perception. So they may have accessibility to that, but the preconceived notion that these organizations are just, like Katya says, peace industry. It's unfortunate, but I think communicating those that have experience with organizations like that and raising awareness is necessary for them to have access. And our media certainly doesn't help promote these programs. They're non-existent in Palestinian media. Thank you.
Okay, about Gaza. The perspective is that too complicated. And even most of the people in Gaza say this program as normalizing, as Rohan said. And they see at some point, especially the part of the government, that we can't go for these places and for these programs. And I was lucky enough that I am one of the few people who was able to travel this year, because only about 10 people who were able to travel this year from Gaza. And I'm rejected at first last year to travel from 4 sites, but this year was lucky enough to get out. And so the perspective is too complicated to think about these organizations, these NGOs, places, and these programs. As Rowan said, and as everyone know, that we have to make awareness about this organization that is not normalizing, but this is some kind of increase the awareness about that we can reshape the reality, and looking forward for the future. It's not about some kind of negotiations, but without weapons, without borders, without knives and stabbing, and without F-16s in the sky. So this is how I saw the program, and this is how when I signed up my name for the program, at first I thought it's gonna be like we're gonna have clashes between members and there'll be fighting and might snap someone and someone will kidnap me and go to the jail. But finally I realized that it's gonna be like some sort of hope, some sort of a future, and really enjoyed being here. Thank you.
I want to add thing regarding to that, that as a Palestinian living in Israel and have an Israeli citizenship, in my university, there's so many people that think about, like, they're kind of boycotting Israel, and they do things that because they have no choice. For example, studying in the Hebrew University, they do that because they have no other choice in studying in other universities. So some people also look at me as a normalizer or as a peace industry, like believing in peace industry. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name's Evan. I'm a rising sophomore at Johns Hopkins, and I'm the co-chair of the J Street chapter at Hopkins. And I have a question. So in the U.S., we seem to get this narrative that neither Israelis nor Palestinians, like large portions of the public, are particularly interested in peace. That sometimes you hear that Israelis are largely motivated in their politics by fear or prejudice, and the same thing of Palestinians, that there's this kind of intractable, deep-rooted conflict that seems to come to no resolution ever. How true is that, and is there like a large or growing group of people, both Israelis and Palestinians, who are interested in forming like a movement for peace in like a grassroots way, and don't, think in a way that kind of goes against this narrative that we have, at least in the U.S., of, kind of single-minded prejudice?
Thanks, Evan, for your question. I think, as I said in my speech, and I'm coming from a city that have a really, really narrow perspective on the Palestinian society and driven by prejudices and biases on what Palestinians are. But in the same time, we have in the same society and in the same community grassroots organizations of Palestinians and Israelis that are operating together to either bring people to just meet each other. This is the first step where peace starts, as we are doing here, or affecting policies if it's in the West Bank or inside of Israel. And I think, as you asked, there are so many Israeli organizations that are operating in the West Bank and actually bringing facts and details about how life there looks like and how all the relationship between settlers and Palestinians in the West Bank is going, as Peace Now does as well. And I will say that the majority of the Israeli society, I will speak from this perspective, is just desperate. And they are tired and they have no hope because we lived for so many years that someone tells us, okay, we will have peace someday. And every generation says that I hope my children won't serve in the army. I hope my children wouldn't have to go through checkpoints on the other side. But we don't know yet, and we have a long way to walk. But I think changing the narrative is starting from changing the story, and that's exactly what we are doing here.
Maybe I'll say, go ahead, Aya. Go ahead, please.
I hope that I can answer you that it's not truth, but it is. And I think that the situation is going worse and worse every year. Since I moved to Jerusalem 4 years ago, I see so many racism, segregations, killing, citizen having weapons, like settlers having weapons. So the situation is really, really hard back home, and it feels like we're losing hope. But this is what created in me create the need of starting a project for change. And this is why I started doing my project for change, to bring Israelis to learn my language, because there's so many stereotypes against each other. So I want to break these stereotypes. I want people to know each other, to communicate with each other, to know my culture, to know my language, to know that we're not terrorists. We are human beings as they are. So we hope someday.
A few quick words, if I may. My daughter is in Israel now. She's on a program. It's her second year now. Another kind of people-to-people program. It's called Ultimate Peace. They use Ultimate Frisbee as a way to bridge. And unlike last year, I bought her an Israeli SIM card this time, and I said, I want you to be in touch with me all the time. Big mistake. Over the weekend, I get text messages from her all the time. All the time she's texting me with big questions. Things like, what's happening in Hebron and why is Israel angry with UNESCO? Why does your organization define itself as Zionist? And things of that sort. And each time, I'm walking around with the laundry, doing this, it's too complicated when you come back. And finally, she sent me a message. She took a taxi with my mother, and she says, why is Safta, Grandma, why did she say, why when we went out of the cab, did she say, thank God nothing happened, once she understood that the driver was a Palestinian? And I said to her, look, your grandmother's not a racist. But one thing you have to understand about, and this goes to your question about this conflict, is the role that fear plays in this conflict. Fear is causes a debilitating barrier between people who are in this conflict. And you have to understand how strong that fear is on both sides, and it's justified on both sides, and therefore it's so difficult. Two things that I think are really important, imperative for us to try to get over as much as we can, and this is all of our task, all of us here in this room who are involved in this effort. One is fear, is to try to deal with it head on, not shy away from it, and see how we can get over it. And the other thing is the sense that the complexity of the problem, and it is complex, somehow means, and this is something that we get from our leaders all the time, Israelis in particular, this fallacy that because the problem is so complicated, somehow a solution is too complicated to be found. That somehow the complexity of the problem means that there is no solution. And I think those two things, if we manage to address them somehow, we may really be able to make a change. A while ago, I'll just end with that, I published an article in Arabic in a Palestinian newspaper. I was hosted by a friend, a former colleague who's a Palestinian columnist, and I appealed to Palestinians in the West Bank and said, don't give up on us. Don't give up on us Israelis. Yes, it's true that Israelis have all but given up on peace, that they have very little hope, that they're not interested at the moment in engaging. It's true. But it doesn't have to be that way. There are things that could change that, whether it's leadership or a new attitude among people. And I think, I think it's really imperative for both of us, both Israelis and Palestinians, to not give up on each other and not give up on the potential that there is out there for people, particularly people who are engaging with the other side, to change reality.
We were going to take a quick coffee break. There are snacks and coffee in the adjoining room until about 10:45, and we'll come back in here where you can hear from 2 more of our fellows and 3 more of our panelists. And thank you all so much.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, I'm going to give you a card.
Our fellows speaking will be Hashem and Sapir, each with their own amazing story to tell. Following that, we will have 3 more panelists come up and join us. But for now, we'll go ahead and get started with Hashem.
Just 1 second. Okay. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Hashem Sayed. I'm a Palestinian from East Jerusalem. Dear special guests, look around you. Just take a minute and say hi to the person who sits beside you. Okay. Today is the day we begin to learn, to look through the eyes of the others, to find out and experience the world is like for us. It's also the day we grow up bigger than our differences. And I offer to everyone, regardless of the historical rights and wrongs, a morning filled with desires, hopes, and dreams all of us share. NSL family is deeply honored to welcome all of you here. My story, the child, the soldier, and the tree. Chapter 1, the middle of the beginning. There was always a feeling that I looked different than all the children around the world. I never experienced childhood. I never tasted. But there was nothing to be punished for. How unfair this life is. I grew up so fast, unable to make friends with others of my age. Instead, I preferred to interact with older people and mature people. So, let's first start with the second assassination attempt that was made on me when I was in the 6th grade. An old school gate, too decrepit to protect the many children from the risks around. I used to love to spend more time after school in the school playground. Once, a few steps away from that damaged gate, I became aware of the loud voices all around. People are screaming, "Run! Run!" I have no idea where the shouting is coming from. And over, "Run! Run!" I looked in every direction. Suddenly, a dark green Jeep military shows up from nowhere. Wow, what to do? What to do? Think, I thought. Throw your bag and go back to the school property. While I was thinking, a barrage of bullets rained behind my back, shot by 3 Israeli soldiers. With no warning, no reason, or any explanations. Those bullets of hatred almost finished my journey. It was as if the clock suddenly stopped after that incident. I relived that terrible incident over and over in my mind. Some people wondered, though, an evil spirit lived in my body. Others thought that madness had struck me. From that day forward, trust between my family, my friends, and anyone else became difficult. Chapter 2, Al-Nakba, the catastrophe. When I was 6-year-old boy, I suffered my first assassination attempt. It's normal to not understand how the system works yet. you are just a little kid. Nightmares become unwelcome guests in that period. This started on the fateful day, which my family called Punish Day, Hell Day, or Doomsday. While I was having fun in my neighborhood beside the walnut tree, a huge Israeli soldier with green eyes and well-ordered blonde hair drove up. I assumed the soldier would give me candies. The soldier stopped his car and got out to give me the gift. In reality, that gift was a 10 full minutes of a brutal beating on my body. It felt as if the soldier wanted to teach me some kind of lesson. So many things died in my heart that day. The Hell Day, Punishment Day, Doomsday, whatever you want to call it. That day turned into 2 years of treatment and rehab. A cold hospital bed imprisoned me, instead a warm home. Chapter 3, a life of different kind. During this period, I missed childhood most cherished moments. I was denied entry to school. And even the simple joy of playing with my friends. My testimony wasn't documented. Simply, I was a small child. And the monster who beat me was able to flee and evade responsibility for his actions. And I was unable to get justice for what was done to me, still to this day. As a result of the physical abuse done to me, I contracted asthma and an immune system disorder, so I went through a period of long treatment with medicines that had horrible side effects. Consequently, I underwent difficult operation with very low survival rate. My family prepared for the funeral ceremonies in case I didn't survive. But I am Hashim. I am a survivor. Chapter 4, ending for a new beginning. There are many questions that still have gone unanswered. Who were the soldiers? Why did they hurt me? What did they feel when they tried to execute me? Do they have brothers, sons, grandchildren? What about their conscience? And do they enjoy a peaceful sleep? How I wish destiny could bring me together with one of them so that I could look into his eyes and tell him, thank you. If not for what was inflicted on me, I wouldn't have known the taste and the color of life. Because I adore life, I don't know how to hate. Because I'm not sly, I forgive my enemies even before I forgive my friends. And as the Palestinian author Mahmoud Darwish said, على هذه الأرض ما يستحق الحياة, which means we have on this earth what makes life worth living. So today, I'm repeating after Darwish, على هذه الأرض ما يستحق الحياة. Forgiveness is the beginning for change. NSL is the change. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. First of all, I want to say that it's really uneasy for me to speak after Hashem. So, thank you, Hashem. And thank for you also to come to our stories and my story. And I'm here to share a little piece of my life and my story. So my name is Sapir Ifergan. You probably don't remember my last name, so Sapir is good enough. And I'm an Israeli, Jewish Israeli. I live in a city called Be'er Sheva, and I'm really happy to be here today. So, one of my first memories is me sitting next to a brown old table with my cousins next to me and dipping homemade cookies in mint tea while listening to the stories of my grandfather. His story began in the old synagogues of Casablanca, where he and his family prayed to reach to the promised land, Israel. As soon as they had the chance, he used to say, they would return to their homeland and leave Morocco and all of their life behind them with no hesitations. They got the chance in 1962. They immigrated to Israel, but they never really left Morocco. After centuries of living side by side with their Muslim neighbors, their culture became a mixture of cultures between the Jewish one and the Arab one. For example, until today, my father listens to the songs of Kulthum, the Egyptian singer, right before he heads up to the synagogue on Friday night, like he used to do with his father as a child. The mixture of culture reflected also through the food. And wow, what a food, right? A lot of people here know this food. Several years ago, I asked my grandmother, Grandma, where did you learn to make all these Arab dishes? She told me her Palestinian friend taught her to make everything. Ever since I was a child, I heard a lot about the Awani family. They were the best friends of my grandfathers. It was natural that my grandfather's best friends would be Palestinians, because they were culturally closer to them than the Jews who had immigrated from Europe. It didn't even matter that the Awani family was living in Gaza. Those days, the border was open. My mother told me that when she was 14 years old, she suffered a disease that the doctors in Israel had no solution for. Salah, one of the Awanis, took my mother through the narrow streets of one of the refugee camps in Gaza to a 90 years old healer. My mom described how the old man sat on the naked concrete floor, smiled at her, and told her, Aji, binti, come, my daughter. Don't be afraid. A few years later, in the late 80s, the First Intifada began. Violent acts from both sides have increased. The border to Gaza had been closed. The Awani family was afraid that they would be marked as those who cooperate with the enemies. And just like this, the long friendships came to an end. Also, the stories about the Awani family decreased with the years. It's the summer of 2011 now. My entire family, my parents, my sister, my brother, and also my grandma were on their way to Eilat for a holiday. I was a soldier at that time, so I couldn't join them. The morning of August 18th was just another hot summer day in my base. I was on the phone with my mom, and she told me how much fun they had, and that they were heading back to Be'er Sheva, the city where my family lives, around noon. After lunch, I passed the TV in the common room. I was able to hear the serious voice of the anchor woman as she was reading the news. And then I saw crashed silver Toyota car and the white title on a red background. Casualties in terror attack on Route 12. Route 12 is the road which connects Eilat and Be'er Sheva. My parents' car was a silver Toyota. I couldn't speak. My hands were shaking as I tried to call my mom. No answer. I called my dad. No answer. I called my grandma, my sister, and still no answer. I tried to call more family members, but everything was chaotic and no one had answers at this time. I got back home, praying to see my family there, but the house was empty. How can I explain the fear which I felt? I don't exactly remember how long it took, maybe a minute, maybe an hour. But suddenly I got a phone call. I heard my mom's voice. She said that the car was shot. But we're okay. It's a miracle. But for the car behind them, the exact same car, like my parents' car, there were no miracles. It was hit by an RPG, and the 4 people in the car were killed. And who knows, maybe one of the terrorists were related to the Awani family. And when he was on the other side of the attack, he didn't know he was threatening my grandmother and my mother. And maybe someone of the Awani family is behind one of Hamas's rocket launchers that aimed toward Israel, toward Be'er Sheva, toward my family, who used to be his. And who knows, maybe one of my family might have participated in an attack on Gaza Strip, which might have destroyed the Awani's home. Almost 6 years have passed since that day, and you probably wonder what has happened to us ever since then. What can one possibly feel after years of fear? We should probably be hateful. But my grandmother does not hate. She still cares and worries for the Awanis when she heard that something happened in Gaza. And my father does not hate. His Palestinian co-workers are still his friends. My mother does not hate. She still remembers the old Palestinian healer. And what about me? One of the important things that I understood is that a lot of us, Israelis and Palestinians, carry on our shoulders heavy responsibility, our family history. As I mentioned, from a young age, I hear about the yearning of my family for the Holy Land. I remember almost in every Jewish holiday the days when we were a persecuted minority and how important it is to protect our country so that the Holocaust will never happen again. And also my Arab friends, they remember houses that they never visited, keeping keys to homes that were destroyed many years ago. And it's important to remember our history, who we are and where we came from. But I'm living with strong sense that progress can only come if we all focus much more on our future, not only our past. And the change must come now. The situation cannot stay this way. We all deserve freedom, equality, and security. My friend Aya cannot continue to suffer from discrimination in airports. My friend Katya cannot continue to live under missile threat. My friend Hashem cannot continue to live his life with constant threat of violence against him. I have hope because I know we are more alike than different. Because I know in days past, real friendship between people regardless of their national affiliation were common, just as I have experienced here in our NSL group. And the responsibility to bring a better future is on everyone who in this room. The biggest responsibility is on us, Israelis and Palestinians, but also you, as educators who shape future leaders, and the students who one day will lead a delegation to resolve international conflicts. I would like you to pass on the story of my family, which refuses to hate, which reflect coexistence, friendship, and hope for a better future. When you hear about the problems in our region, it is easy to lose hope. But I ask you to spread out the word. It is possible. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. At this time, I would like to invite the second round of panelists to come and join us on stage. Much like the previous format, we will have our panelists introduce themselves and then open it up to Q&A from the audience. Grace?
Sure. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to Hashem and Shapir for such a such compelling, moving talks. And thank you so much to New Story Leadership for having us here. I'm really delighted to be part of this. This is my first time participating in something like this here in DC, and I'm really struck by how much synergy there is between, I think, the work that New Story Leadership is trying to do and the kind of work that I have tried to do in the course of my somewhat short career working in refugee legal services. So a bit on my background. I have my master's degree from Georgetown University in Arab Studies. And I also worked as a legal advisor at St. Andrew's Refugee Services in Cairo, Egypt, assisting Syrian, Sudanese, Ethiopian, Eritrean refugees with their resettlement cases. And I currently work as a researcher at Georgetown University's Institute for the Study of International Migration, where we really try to work on move away from sort of questions of pure ivory tower academic issues and work more towards operational, solution-oriented kind of material. So trying to kind of bridge this kind of a gap that I think exists between academia and practice. And so being part of what's going on here at NSL and SAIS is something that's really quite, I think, important for me personally, but also sort of in this career trajectory of trying to bridge, again, sort of the sort of yawning gap between academia and practice. So there were a couple of points, I think, a lot of really important synergies for me that really stood out in some of the narratives that we've been hearing today. And a bit of my work, I'll try to connect it to a bit of my work working with refugees and kind of just trying to work to dispel some of the narratives and misconceptions that exist around refugees as well. So I think this has been a major theme throughout the day, but much in the same way that I think there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of misconception, and there's a lot of misinformation about what goes on the ground in Israel-Palestine. We see a very similar trajectory within broader narratives about refugees as well. I think in sort of the popular narratives, the ways we have in talking about refugees, we've kind of evolved these three main ways of talking about refugees in a way that I think we could probably even connect it to a lot of what's going on the ground in Israel-Palestine. And the first sort of way I think that has evolved that we have in talking about refugees is sort of numbers, sort of these faceless masses. We hear 65.6 million people, including 5.3 million refugees, Palestinian refugees, are living in situations of displacement this year. This number is quite staggering. But an effect of these numbers and trying to understand the scope of the problem is also, I think, to elide some of the humanity and some of the fact that, these are 65.6 individuals with individual stories, with individual narratives and individual experiences. And when we talk about people in sort of a mass, in a group in this way, we can really elide some of the quite important human dimension of displaced persons that I think is quite absent from narratives that we see that are used in the ways that people talk about refugees, both in popular narratives, but also I see it in my field in academia, but also in sort of in the field of practice, in casework, legal casework with refugees, So something else we see, I think, a lot is a victim narrative, where a lot of aid agencies and international organizations, but as well as media sources, really frame refugees as victims. And the victimhood narrative has a similar effect, which is to elide sort of this whole host of other things that refugees bring to the table as people, right? At the end of the day, we're all people, and refugees are people with abilities and capacities and I think the real potential to contribute to the communities that host them. But when we talk about refugees as victims, as sort of these passive recipients of which displacement has happened to them, we aren't focusing on sort of the whole person. We sort of like reduce refugees down to this sort of shade of humanity, and I'm just not getting the whole picture in the way that we're talking about refugees. And then I think a third way that we end up talking about refugees and displaced persons, and again, there's a lot of synergy between this and what we've heard today, is sort of refugees as kind of a source of insecurity, or we train a bit of suspicion on them. This is certainly something we've heard a lot of in the US, certainly a narrative that has been propagated a good bit, where it's like, where are these people coming from really? How much do we know about them, right? And so there's this idea of refugees as kind of this potentially dangerous unknown. They're coming from areas of conflict. They're coming from places where there are terrorists, designated groups, And so I think in this way, again, not getting the full picture of sort of the humanhood, the personhood of refugees and the people who, are experiencing displacement. So how do you go about changing a narrative? How do you change a discourse? I mean, I think Paul spoke very eloquently to that this morning, I mean, it's through story. How do you change the story? Through stories. And so that's something we've really been trying to work on at Georgetown University. Something we've really looked at is developing teaching materials. So materials that can go into middle school and high school classrooms here in the US. I mean, how you start with the next generation, right? I mean, I think that's a real tenet of NSL, right? Is that engaging young people in sort of discussions about difficult topics is really important. And so what we've done at Georgetown University is we conducted a series of participatory video projects with refugees in Jordan. So we had refugees, we gave them these small handheld cameras, kind of did a little bit on, how to conduct interviews and things like that, how to frame your shot, some kind of the technical stuff of video. And then we asked them to take the cameras home for 1 week and show aspects of their lives. And we gave them very broad guidance. We said, what should Americans know about your life as a refugee here in Jordan? And we worked with Sudanese refugees, Iraqis, Syrians, and Palestinians as well. And so we really got this, when we got the footage, we got about 40 plus hours of footage from this workshop, from these series of workshops that we conducted. And it was this whole wealth of material. I mean, people breakdanced, they rapped, they recited poetry, they interviewed their family members, they interviewed themselves, they gave these monologues, some of them just, did these panning shots around their homes, and it was this whole idea about, people really welcome the viewer into their homes and just kind of try to give a bit of a snapshot of what their lives are like. And I mean, for us, this was really important. We got sort of a broader, bigger picture, right? And so we took this footage and we edited it down into several different videos, which we then created some teaching resources to go along with it, resources, crossword puzzles, that kind of thing, for different, adjusting them for different age levels. And all those resources are now available online. But I will say this, is that we don't think these resources have been used particularly extensively. And it's for us, and I'd love to talk to the other panelists in the audience, and a lot of the expertise that we have here in the room is, how do you get people interested in this sort of stuff? Where's the hook? Where's the engagement? How do you, distill down really complex stories and narratives into these sort of politically palatable sound bites that will sort of get people to ask broader questions? So that's a little bit about my work. I'll probably pass it on from here, but thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to Paul and NSL for extending the invitation to have me here. I'm Lauren Hess, and I'm from the South Africa-Washington International Program, who's a sister program to NSL and WIP. I just completed my bachelor's in politics, philosophy, economics, and international relations last year, and I'll be studying at Georgetown actually come the fall as a Fulbright candidate. But a reason why I'm particularly passionate about the NSL model of storytelling is that it's something that's very close to the work that I also do with Africa Matters initiative. And as you say, what do you do when you don't have resources? You can tell stories wherever you are. So two of my friends founded this organization. I helped to manage it. And it was really a platform to get young people across the African continent to just talk to each other. So much of our media is filtered through Western lenses that tell you about the genocides, the poor leadership, a lot of which are all true, but they don't tell you about the startup hub that are in Kenya, in Ghana, and the great innovation that comes from the continent. And long story short, we were just awarded a recognition by the Queen of England last month. So it's something that starts so small that can make a great impact. As myself as a South African, we feel so separated from the rest of the continent a lot of the time. I think sometimes that's due to our fault. We literally destabilized the rest of Southern Africa during our own apartheid regime. So it's been a very important learning experience for myself to learn more about the people that I share this incredibly diverse and dynamic continent with. And I'm learning how to tell stories from the rest of the Israeli and Palestinian team, because I've been in tears almost every time you speak, and it's been incredible. So thank you again for having me.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew DeMeo. I want to first echo my appreciation and thanks to Paul and NSL for offering us this platform and this awesome event to get to know some people and hear their stories, and I think it's really important and valuable. My own experience with Palestine is a mix of academic and life. I've spent a while living in the Middle East, a couple years in Jordan, and I spent a summer in Nablus and a summer in Birzeit University before that. And I just recently, in September of 2016, finished my MA in Palestine Studies at SOAS in London. And my sort of work really it's not dissimilar from NSL's ideas, but from a different sort of angle, is that I look at the story of Palestine, I'm a Palestine studies sort of person, as a broader question that doesn't just entail what's happening on the ground in Palestine, but also amongst the Shatat, amongst the dispersed people that live primarily in the neighboring countries around Palestine. And because that's where I spent most of my time, 2 years in Jordan, amongst displaced and refugee Palestinians. And my work kind of focuses on the relations between these disparate Palestinian communities. So how do Palestinians in different places, how do they bridge these temporal, these spatial, these gaps in identity that exist between Palestinians in Jordan and Palestinians that live inside Israel, or Palestinians that live inside the West Bank or Gaza, or Palestinians that live in different parts of diaspora in Syria and Lebanon. And what happens when these different groups of Palestinians that have this shared national identity, what happens when they come and spend time together, when they encounter one another in a way they hadn't done before, because Palestinian identity is so based, for many, is based on a place they've never been to and a people that they're separated from. So what happens when that distance is shrunk? What happens when people meet face to face? And so I previously looked at this through the lens of return memoirs. So works written by people who, after Oslo primarily, were able to go home to Palestine for the first time, either in their lives or since they were refugeed in 48 or in 67. And they encounter the land, they encounter the place they ordered their identity around from afar. And there was, often reassurance and renewal of this love and this tie to this land, but there's also often tension between a Palestinian who spent their whole life in exile and maybe in Europe or even nearby in Lebanon or Syria or Jordan, and the Palestinians that spent their whole lives living under occupation or living as a minority in a state that discriminates against them. And there were some really interesting episodes when it comes to, for example, a Palestinian who went back to, whose name is escaping me. He's a scholar, but he went back to his home, his family's house in Haifa, and found it was occupied, but not by an Israeli family, but by another Palestinian family. one that they were refugeed as well, and they were refugeed within the city. They were internally displaced, but they ended up in their house, and there's that connection, there's that belonging, but also there's the, when the guy was trying to leave, the people who lived there offered the keys to him, like, this is your house, but like both knowing that this situation is unnatural and there's this tension, but it exists. And another one that always sticks with me was a guy who was talking about going to Jerusalem. He was born in the diaspora, and he went to Jerusalem for the first time, and he had spent his whole life telling people, oh, I'm from Jerusalem, because outside that's very easy to do. But when he had this almost little mini crisis when he was like, what do I say to someone who spent their entire life in Jerusalem, who lives in Jerusalem, who's Qudsi? What do I say? I can't tell them I'm from Jerusalem. And he came up with saying, I'm from Jerusalem, but I've never been here. This is my first time here, which is an interesting thing. And he said no one looked twice at it, because Palestinian identity is so tied to this dispersion, so tied to this understanding that we're not where we're from. Even if some people live within what is now Israel or within the West Bank, this is not the Palestine that we imagine, that we believe in. So the work I'm going to do for my PhD, which, I don't know if I mentioned, I'm going to start my PhD in the fall at GW in anthropology, is looking at another situation where disparate Palestinian communities are coming face to face, but it's in a very different sense than return after Oslo. It's the integration of Palestinian refugees from Syria into the refugee camps in Lebanon, which is a very different scenario when it's one of hardship, where already resources stretched thin in places in Lebanon, where people already live very challenged lives because of the lack of rights and recognition they get from the Lebanese state. All of a sudden are encountered with a group of their own people, but it's the people that they have only known from afar, or connections to from afar. So what happens? How do they build a life together? What are the tensions that exist, and what are the ties that bond people together? And so that's the kind of stories that I'm looking at.
Thank you all for being here today. So just in essence of time, because we want to get to as many questions as possible, we're going to limit the answers just for now for 2 to 3, giving the first option to our panelists and fellows on stage, and then extending it to the fellows that are sitting in the audience. So what questions do we have for this group?
Thank you. Katya, Aya, Sapir, Hashem, thank you so much. Hashem, Sapir, so much of what struck me about what each of you said today was how you, Hashem, how you and your family, Sapir, met fear, met violence, met hatred in a way that you refused, or your family refused, to meet it with hate. It seems to me that that's so much of what's being asked of people on both sides of this, to take what is really a justifiable reaction to what's happening to you and the people you love, which is hate, and refuse to meet it that way. How's that work? How do you pull that off? How can you identify how to do it and spread it so that others can benefit?
Well, first of all, I want to answer this question in a question. Why revenge? This is the circle of violence we are facing in our region. So what I'm trying to do is to just break this circle. If everyone from the both sides try to do the same that I'm doing to break the circle, so the circle of violence is shrinking. So we can live without violence, but it will take, I think, long time. And one of the reasons also that because of my experience, my suffering in Jerusalem, it's the time like we are the young people to say enough. Enough is enough for these actions of violence. We are the new generation. We have other options to follow. Yeah.
So I have two comments for your question. The first one is that I'm not sure if my family. I think that if to my story had a bad end, I'm not sure that I was standing here today and say that I'm not hate anyone. So this is, I think it's really important to remember that eventually this experience makes me understand that this reality can't continue in this. Its change must come. And I think that maybe one of the reasons why my family refused to hate the other side is because they know who are the people who live in the other side, who lives behind the border. My family met the Awani family in one of the markets in Gaza. They used to speak Arabic because this is their first language. They immigrated from Morocco, as I told you. So the connection was just natural. They know who are the people who live behind the border. So it's much harder to hate the other side when you can attach faces to the people who live there. And I think that in our generation, most of us never even met a Palestinian before. Palestinian who live in the West Bank or in Gaza Strip. For example, this is the first time that I met Palestinian, Khaled. The first time. I'm 26 years old. This is the first time that I met Palestinian who live in Gaza. So it's much more harder to choose not to hate when you can't, when you don't know anyone in the other side.
Hi, I'm Shelby. I'm with the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations. I have a question for Grace and Matthew regarding refugees. So with 2 million Palestinian refugees in Jordan alone, and the PLO claiming that 1 in 3 refugees worldwide are Palestinian, and some of those still holding on to their right to return. So what is the future implications for the greater diaspora of Palestinian refugees, taking into consideration the right of return?
So that's an interesting thing, is that for that, a lot of these people that are in the diaspora, the people that I lived amongst, the story of their displacement from Palestine doesn't start with the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip in 1967. It starts with the most often forcible removal of their villages by either by fear or directly by Israeli and before the state Jewish forces. And they have been dispersed. And for a very long time, they were the backbone of the Palestinian national movement. They were the ones that were when the PLO was in the diaspora, they were the ones that were providing the resources and the lives to struggle for Palestinian national liberation. And after Oslo, that changed. And all of a sudden, they were on the outside, having been the site of the revitalization of Palestinian national identity. All of a sudden, they were basically an afterthought. After 5 years of interim agreements, we will come up with a just solution to the refugee problem. For a lot of these people, especially in places, I mean, in Jordan, the vast majority have citizenship, but they are the national other for Jordanians, for Jordanians. In Lebanon, they don't have citizenship. They don't have the right to work in dozens of professions. They aren't even allowed to, they're not allowed to own property, and they're not allowed to improve their dwellings in the camp for fear of them becoming permanently settled in those countries. And for them, the negotiations between Abbas and the PA and Israel means very little to them, because their homes, what they can claim to go back to, is not in the West Bank or Gaza Strip. It's what is now Israel. And there are some really interesting and imaginative ways that people have talked about what could come of the diaspora after a peace solution. There are a lot of people who don't want to leave. There are a lot of people in Lebanon, even despite all the discrimination in Jordan, they would want to stay. They would want to stay as equal citizens with equal rights, but they'd want to stay. And the same thing in Jordan, and maybe even Syria. But there are a lot of people who want to, at the very least have the right to go home. Maybe not to stay, but to visit when they wanted to visit. To go to their village to see where their parents or their grandparents were born. And that's not something that right to go back is not something that can be bought off with compensation. It's not a one-time right. It's not, either you take compensation or you return. It's one or the other. There is justified compensation for the damage that was done in 48 and 67, but that doesn't take away the right to have a tie to that land. And what that looks like, that's not up to me. That's not up to the people like me who study, but it's up to people whose lives have been torn for 7 decades now, and they live in this state of transience but permanence, with nowhere to go, nowhere to call home. And so it's complicated, but we have to look at, when we're talking about changing stories, we have to look at that as central. The diaspora is not, tangential to the Palestine question. It's central to the Palestine question. There's no solution to the Palestine question that doesn't address refugees. So I don't have an answer to what it would look like, but my answer, I guess, is something has to happen. And a lot of what has to happen is Israel has to recognize the role it played in creating the Palestinian refugees and be willing to accommodate Palestinians' right of return. And the countries in the diaspora, the countries that host large Palestinian populations, they have to reconcile the differences that they had with the Palestinians. I mean, Palestinians in Jordan and Lebanon caused a lot of trouble. Not maliciously, I don't believe, but by virtue of the struggle that they waged, they caused trouble. And they need to be willing to accept that some of these people are going to live permanently as equal citizens with equal rights. So it's a big problem, but that needs a lot of parties to come together. But there's no simple answer for either the Israelis, they have to stay in the diaspora, or the Lebanese and Jordanians, they have to go back. That's not going to work.
Sure, and I'll kind of zoom out and kind of give you more of an answer from kind of the field of migration studies, where I'm sort of dabbling now, I guess. So, much of the international legal protections that we have in place for refugees, so the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees, its 1967 protocol, the resolutions that set up UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, none of that applies to Palestinians, right? To Palestinian refugees. Because they are under the protection of UNRWA, another UN agency, and so with that sort of the legal protections and things like that we have set up and put into place for to take care of the world's refugees, people forcibly displaced from their homes, just simply doesn't apply to Palestinians. And that includes this sort of framework of durable solutions that we sort of operate with in sort of thinking about ways that people can end their situation of forced displacement. When you've accessed a durable solution, it means, that you're no longer living as a forcibly displaced person. And these 3 durable solutions on which the entire refugee legal regime is premised are return, which I think Matt addressed a lot of the sort of tensions and complexities involved in return for Palestinians. There's local integration, which I think Matt also addressed in terms what does it mean to be locally integrated, and it clearly varies majorly from country to country, whether you're a Palestinian in Lebanon, a Palestinian living in Jordan, or a Palestinian living in Egypt, et cetera. And then the third durable solution is resettlement. And because the UN Refugee Agency is not mandated to conduct resettlement for Palestinian refugees, resettlement is not an option, right? So, I think really of the 3 durable solutions that we use to conceive of ways for refugees to stabilize their lives, local integration is really the only viable one for Palestinians at this time. And we've seen that in some ways it's happening in varying degrees in other countries, but none of the three are really realistic. I think for Palestinian refugees, the Palestinian diaspora, right? But also I think broader refugee populations of other nationalities as well. I mean, I think this really speaks to sort of the inadequacy of the framework that we use to conceptualize solutions for refugees. And it's going to be, I think, quite a long, complex road for sort of rebuilding ways that we think about solutions for refugees. But for Palestinians in particular, this framework just simply is inadequate for helping people to end their situations of displacement and stabilize their lives.
Just about UNRWA. Thank you. So just about UNRWA here. UNRWA is basically, from my studies about the Palestinian history, was created by the UN because the UN, in a way, created, by their decision, the refugee problem, right? So obviously, Israel had a lot to do with it. But Matt, asking you, with this research that you conducted and hearing stories of Palestinians living abroad, what do you think, what have you heard Palestinians, how much responsibility do they hold the UN accountable for in looking ahead at creating some sort of solution, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think one thing I would say is that UNRWA was founded in 1952, 1950. Anyways, years after the Palestinians were, after the Palestinians were forced from their homes. So I don't think it's accurate to say that the UNRWA caused the refugee crisis. I think the refugees were there, and in Gaza they were retreating by the Quakers, the American Friends Service Committee. In the West Bank, there was this sort of Jordanian government, and different people were providing services in Lebanon the same way. UNRWA came about because they recognized that this was not, because, so in 1949, Israel agreed to UN Resolution 194, which was the condition of them joining the UN, and it said that Palestinians who want to return to their homes and live peacefully have the right to do so. That's the basis of this right of return. They accepted this, but it became very clear very quickly with the destruction of the villages and the shooting of infiltrators and the closing of the borders that Israel is not going to allow those refugees to return to their homes. And so the UN recognized that we need to do something about these people living in these countries, living in tents or in concrete shacks, because this is now a long-term problem, and it's a humanitarian crisis. We need to do something about it. I would say that that is not to say that Palestinians see UNRWA, and again, there are other people who are in this room and on this panel that can speak better about the relationship between Palestinians and UNRWA than I can. That is not to say Palestinians have a very rosy relationship with UNRWA. UNRWA does employ 99% or so of its staff are Palestinians, all the people are refugees, yeah. The ones that are working in the schools, that are teaching in the schools, that are doing the services, primarily are almost exclusively are Palestinians. But there's a lot of tension between UNRWA and the Palestinian refugees. There's a lot of tension with the services that are provided. A lot of tension with the fact that Palestinians have come to rely on UNRWA for their well-being, which I don't think makes people feel very great about themselves, that they have to depend on the service, on charity to survive. So there is tension there, and there are protests, and UNRWA doesn't have the money to do enough all the time. So
Matt, I don't mean to cut you off here,
yeah.
but we've only really answered about 2 questions, and we have about 5 minutes left, so I just want to make sure that we can get to as many questions as possible.
No, you're right.
Okay, sorry. So does anybody else have anyone? Yeah.
Hi, Dalton Booker again. So especially Sapira, there's been a lot of criticism leveled at the Israeli government, some justified, some possibly not, about their actions towards the Palestinians. And you, as someone who served in the IDF, I'm guessing have more, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but maybe have a better idea of what policies are. And so my question is, what policies would need to change for peace? And do you think that even a regime change, Netanyahu not being in power anymore, would be part of necessary changes?
So first of all, I want to say that I'm here, but I'm not want to represent my country or my government. I'm just here as Sapir, and that's it. So you're still asking for my opinion. So I have to say that my opinion is not necessarily represent the opinion that most of the Israelis have. And I think that the problem is not only our politicians and our parties and leaders that we elect. I think that the problem starts in the people, because we, the Israelis, chose the same politicians every elections. So I'm not sure that the problem is policy. I mean, of course, it's also policy, but not only the policy. I think that the problem is, as someone from my group, I don't remember exactly who mentioned it before me, but there is a lot of fear. I am afraid to visit in the West Bank. Jonathan here says how important it is, and I say, Jonathan, wow, you're very brave, but I'm afraid. So I think that the problem is that because we are afraid as Israelis, because of our history, because of the Holocaust, because of 2,000 years that we didn't have homeland. Everything starts there. And this is why we elect the same leader every couple of years. So I think that what we need to change is, first of all, the conceptions among the people. Yeah.
Do we have time for one more question? One more. So one more question and then one more answer from our fellows or panelists.
Hi, I'm still Evan. Still with J Street U at JHU. Nothing's changed. So in J Street U, we're like a national on-campus organization. We do grassroots organizing in the Jewish community and progressive community towards like a two-state kind of future for Israel and Palestine. And as like an on-campus American Jewish leader, I want to ask, like, what do you think that American students, Jewish, part of the Jewish diaspora, Palestinian diaspora, no relation whatsoever, have a role to play in creating peace in Israel and in Palestine? And if so, what can we do? What should we do?
Well, I think that not just the American or the European. The thing that we need is more the international partners to be more aware in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And like one of the things that I feel that it's really important to invest projects in the conflict zone. I think American they can do like more than this. They can because social media, it's playing a main role in this case, because some people, like, for example, a few days ago, I was in the metro station and someone just asked me, like, what this flag means? And I laughed, like, I told him Palestine. And he said, what? Where is that? So I think, first of all, education. And if I answered you the question.
So, hi, Evan. Just wanted to add something. I think one of the main points for having NSL here in Washington and not somewhere else in the world is that important decisions that are affecting our life back in the region are being taken here in the city. And I've been working in Congress for the past 3 weeks, and in these 3 short weeks, I've been seeing many different decisions that are being taken about us. Many different briefings, hearings about the Middle East, about Israel, about the Palestinian resistance. So I agree with everything Hashem said. Apart from that, those are your representatives that are there, your senators, the people that are making the decisions. So as Americans, Jews, Palestinians, or whatsoever, you have this responsibility, like to pressure your representative to know what solutions are being they are looking for, and how can you influence the path to the solution.
Hi. I also want to add, I worked with lots of international students. I was a counselor in Rothberg International School in the Hebrew University. And I think I was amazed each time that no matter how many students want to know and they're trying to stay involved in their campuses, they still don't know. And I think what I would like Jewish young leaders to understand is the complexity, is exactly those stories that everyone has his own or her own opinion on a conflict, on so many different issues. So from being in the Congress and from exposing to the influence that the city has on our life, that's what I want you to take the most. Understand the complexity and dig in. It doesn't matter how hard it is. Please try to understand. That's it.
So in closing, we would like to bring our program manager, Matt, up to,
May I answer?
Yeah. 60 seconds.
It's so short, yeah. Hi, my name is Hazar. Is it working? Okay. So, you asked this question, and you're probably knowing that the power you have, Jewish Americans, and I think it's a duty for you guys to know, to be aware about what you read. I have American Jewish friends that I met during the year, and when they came to Israel, they thought to themselves that I knew everything about Israel. And they're well-educated people. They study, they read articles. But I want you to be aware about each article you read. Look for who wrote it, who's behind it. And I know it's hard, it's energy consumer to look for other sources. I know how hard it is, but it's a duty for you to do that. Thank you.
Matt, do you want to come on up?
Hi, everybody. My name's Matthew Giannitzos, and I'm very, very proud to be the program manager of New Story Leadership this year. But what makes me the most proud of all is getting to hear the stories that are being said by our fellows and getting to know them. That's actually like the true joy, what draws everybody to this program first and foremost. So while I love my job very much, that really is the true benefit of working for NSL. So while I'm helping in this capacity, I wanted to take some time to let you know how you can help, which is part of my job. So the one ask that I'll start off with is continue the discussion. So for everybody who's sitting out there in the audience, who's invested as a stakeholder in the conflict, or kind of just in humanity in general, or you folks who are here on the panel who have invested your life into researching these kinds of things, draw from these people. Their perspectives are invaluable. And they have ground experience of having lived in these places, and they can really inform a lot of people to what needs to be done. The second ask that I have for you is how you can donate to New Story Leadership. So yes, I am asking you for money. So we have drafted these handy little pamphlets. I'll show you right here. If you open them up, there's a little thing that you can fill out, give a donation. New Story Leadership, would like to run on love alone, but we can't. We actually do need, some donations. So if you feel particularly moved to open your wallets, much like you've opened your minds and your hearts, please give it a consideration. And then, if you're also interested in learning a little bit more about our method, Paul Costello, our founder, has printed out a couple drafts of the New Story Leadership method, and it's a really good way to get familiar with exactly what we're trying to accomplish. Finally, just because, and I think Ori Nir stepped out, but Katya and Hashem are at Americans for Peace Now, and they're doing a project that reflects the podcast that they're doing called The Dove. And there's an event on July 20th at 8:30 p.m. at Busboys and Poets on 1025 5th Street in Northwest Washington, D.C. And it's another opportunity for you to come and engage with our fellows and sharing of their stories in a more official capacity. So I hope that you consider coming, as well as to our other events. They're on our website. Please check it out, newstoryleadership.org. Further, my final ask is that another way that you can help us is to consider becoming a host family or a work placement yourself. So we have several of our host families out in the audience today. If you would like to stand up and just identify yourselves really quickly, and please give them a round of applause. So Joyce, of course, is a long-time host family, but Barry Cohen and Lee and Dennis Turpak are new. And I think, they're learning along with us a little bit of how this thing kind of goes. But if you or somebody that might be interested, please talk to them while you have time here today. They have invaluable experience in hosting our fellows and welcoming them into their homes. And then finally, if you would like to become a work placement, Martha Allen from Women's Institute for Freedom of the Press is still here. But of course, we had, please stand up. And then we had Ori Nir, who was on the panel representing Americans for Peace Now. Please talk to them as well. They can let you know how to welcome New Story Leadership participants into your organization. It's really valuable work that they do, and it augments the work that our participants do for New Story Leadership. So that's it for me. I really, really thank you for coming. Thank you to Johns Hopkins, SAIS, and thank you, of course, to our lovely panelists and all of the intelligence and conversation that they bring to the table. It's really, really important that we keep having these discussions. Please join us for some more refreshments that are out there. Otherwise, I'd like to bring the event to a close. And have a great day. Thank you.
So you're starting at Georgetown next week? I am, and the NSF